Good morning, NIRSA family, and welcome to NIRSA's Ideas in Motion. And today we're talking about exploring belonging in collegiate recreation. My name is Marc Iturriaga. I'm with Bonobo Consulting, where we look at helping organizations foster belonging in work, play, and within the community. And I have a 15-plus career in student affairs, and most of that in recreation, campus recreation. And joining me today is the Wizard of Elon, Larry Mellinger. If you'd like to say hello, Larry.
Hey folks, Mark, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful discussion today, and looking forward to chatting and hearing some great ideas that you all have about fostering belonging in our communities as well.
Wonderful. I'm just going to share our slides. So this is actually a webinar. So that means that videos and mutes are all off, so you won't see that. We ask that you use the chat for any conversations or questions you may have. I'll go a little bit through the agenda for today. First, we're going to look at the concepts of belonging. So what do we actually mean when we speak about belonging? And then that's going to have some definitions and some stories with it. Then Larry's going to talk about the Act, Belong, Commit program at Elon, which really is a great program focusing on belonging in student affairs and the whole student wellness spectrum at Elon. Then we're going to bring it back to a little bit practical refocusing of how belonging will be used through in a new lens, looking at our programs, our services, and how we operate. And if everything goes well, we're going to have a good chunk of questions and sharing opportunities. So you can use the chat if you have any questions, and we'll monitor that and take a look. We may ask individuals if they brought up something in the chat, or if we recognize a program or something that's happened regarding belonging at an institution, we may call in a guest panelist. So that means we'd call upon one of the attendees and we would turn on your camera and get you an opportunity to speak. So there might be a little blip, but that should be okay. All right, so when we talk about belonging, here's Brene Brown, of course, wonderful woman who really talks about belonging. Our interests, motivation, health, and happiness are inextricably tied to the feeling that we belong to a greater community, that we may share common interests and aspirations. So really, when we're talking about belonging here, the way I look at it is the feeling that individuals have. I really love the idea of belonging and the power of belonging because it's owned by the participant. Only the participant gets to really decide whether they feel like they belong. And, as the quote, you can read the quote yourself, but looking at the quote, it really is a deep intrinsic feeling and so necessary for our health and well-being, yet we don't often talk about it, especially in collegiate recreation. And we'll talk a little bit more about those challenges. So what is belonging? So there's a wonderful thing we call EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion. And the way I look at it is if inclusion is the practice and diversity is the framework and equity the goal, then belonging is a feeling that people have when these three are realized. You see a picture there, that's from the NIRSA EDI Commission, which is, that's an identity wheel that they talk about about the different identities that we service in collegiate recreation. I'm not going to get into the resource guide, but I wanted to point it out that they have a fabulous resource guide. There's the link there. And of course, if you just look it up on Google, you'll find it very quickly. But really, when we're talking about EDI, that's a huge practice and framework that sometimes goes over a lot of people's heads because it's such a big, important animal that it becomes too big that people kind of, well, I don't really know, how does that relate to me? I don't know how to do that. So that's why I really like focusing on belonging, because it really brings it back to the participant and the focus on people. So when I think about belonging, I'm really focusing on three things, and that is when people feel like they belong, they feel invited, they feel welcome, and they feel included. And those are the three tenets that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to show you here today, I'm wearing my Peace, Love, NIRSA t-shirt. and I'm going to share kind of a little story about belonging for me and what that means for me in NIRSA. So I started my professional collegiate recreation career as an intramural coordinator at the University of Waterloo in 2002. And for, oh geez, I got to do the math here. For 10 years, I was a NIRSA member because that's what they did. They bought us NIRSA memberships. Our institution was not a NIRSA institution. And we went to every other NIRSA conference. And that was my whole NIRSA experience. We would go, we would see some presentations. Most of the time it was team building with our staff because, hey, we get to go somewhere lovely in the States. And that was it. And I never really felt connected to NIRSA. In 2012, I got a phone call from Kathleen Hatch, who was a past NIRSA president. I had no clue who she was because, like I said, I wasn't connected to NIRSA, and I was invited to come on to the Commission for Sustainable Communities. And for me, I was really big into environmental and other sustainability, and I thought, oh, what a great invitation. We talked a little bit more about it. And the reason I was invited is because I was Canadian. That was the sole reason, and that was great because I don't know, Kathleen knew me all too well then, but we had a great conversation, and eventually I was asked to come on the commission and was brought together in Portland with the rest of the commission. And on this commission were some pretty big names in NIRSA: Maureen McGonigal, Tom Kirch, Stan Shingles, Alex Aceta, Pam Sue, Lori Braden, David Bowles, some pretty heavy hitters in NIRSA. And I had no clue who they were. They all, when we arrived, they were all hugging each other and asking each other about their families and what's going on. And I just kind of stood there kind of alone and figuring, oh, I have no clue who these individuals are. Well, I was quickly welcomed into the group. I was amazed by how thoughtful and how attentive they were to who I was, my experience, my journey in collegiate recreation, and they really welcomed me into the group, and that was that next step. The last part was that I felt included in that group. So that's, again, a big heavy hitting group. I think most of those have been past presidents in the past, and that idea of being included, that I had something to offer that group. I mean, these are some tremendous minds that I felt like I was able to share my experiences. I felt heard. I learned a lot from them, and I felt included in that group. Well, that was kind of that last step for me to really understand and ask more questions about NIRSA. Since then, I have been, Larry. Oh, this is why Larry doesn't like technology. All right, so since then, I have been the co-chair for that commission. I've been on conference committees. I've done national presentations. I was on the assembly. I'm an avid contributor to Rec Chat. I was asked to be on the Canadian Region Task Force. I was on the NIRSA faculty, where I met my handsome friend Larry here. And it's even gone past that to where now I'm a NIRSA Foundation donor. Without a tax receipt, by the way. So Larry, please get on that. Help us Canadians get those tax receipts. To where I'm playing Words with Friends and part of the NIRSA SOC competition. And essentially, I feel like I belong. I mean, I honestly believe in that hashtag NIRSA family. I don't think this was probably the biggest professional choice in my career, was to get involved, because at that point, before joining the commission, I wasn't really connected to my career. I wasn't connected to other professionals, and not in a network, what can you do for me sort of way, but in that really truly sense of belonging within my work. And it's really brought me here. And to me, that's a powerful thing. And that kind of talks about the steps of when participants and students feel invited, welcome, and included. That's when the magic happens. All right, so what does it mean to be invited? So invited is the culture, behaviors, and understanding that participants experience observed before participating. Now, this is a really important part for me, is this part of the invitation, because usually we look at our marketing and social media strategies of ways to invite. We'll talk a little bit more about how we can navigate the invitation with a lens of belonging. But invitation is more than that. It's the branding, it's the imagery that people see, it's what they see when they pass your facility. It's what activity opportunities that they know or see before they even get involved with you. It's what they've heard from other students, from faculty, from staff, from members. It's those preconceived ideas that they already have about campus recreation and what they will experience, whether right or wrong. When we talk about welcoming, it's the culture, behaviors, and understanding participants experience observed through choosing to participate. So it's how when they arrive, how they're met and spoken to. Again, oftentimes this is really focused on with customer service. We feel that is the welcoming environment, and it's much more than that. It's looking at program offerings. It's how are our instructors, staff, referees, how are they involved in creating that welcoming environment? Again, it's things like imagery and wayfinding, accessibility. It's how do participants interact with each other when staff aren't around. It's about the demographics of the people utilizing your facilities and services. Health, safety, and cleanliness are huge impacts to a welcoming environment. No one wants to walk into a dirty bathroom, right? You don't feel very welcome like that. So these are the little things that we think about when it comes to being welcoming. And lastly, included. All right, this is the idea that, essentially that a participant comes and is able to do whatever it is they want to do at their appropriate skill level, at the competitiveness level that they want. They're getting the social connectivity that they want. And really this is the magic sauce. It's hard to do included if you don't have the invitation and welcoming environment brought into play. So these are things like, again, what skill levels of opportunities do you offer? What are the expected fitness levels? How are people connecting socially? The whole competitiveness spectrum, from competitive to just for fun to skill development. What does the staffing look like? How diverse is your staff so that people feel like, yes, I can come here and work here or be a part of that. So really, the whole thing that comes into play for me is the hot take is that we, in collegiate recreation, we already foster a strong sense of belonging. So don't get me wrong, we do all those things. We are welcoming, inviting, and inclusive to our participants. The hot take for me is that we do those to those that are already indoctrinated into the current sport and rec culture. All the directors and coordinators and marketing people that I've met in collegiate recreation, for the most part, are all sport and fitness and rec enthusiasts. They've lived their whole lives in that field, and that's wonderful. And they've got an energy and a vibrancy to them that is it's so infectious and wonderful. But we have a very narrowed lens because we have a sport and rec culture lens that we utilize when we make decisions, when we talk about our programs and the structures that we put into place. And so we are always talking in collegiate recreation about how do we get more people active. One of the taglines that I used for a long time is more students, more active, more often. And the challenge is that we actually, if we want to grow our community, we got to look beyond that sport and rec culture. We have to realize that we are servicing all students, right? And so it really comes back to the who. And a lot of the things that we navigate are things like time, cost, place, convenience. Those are great things that we need to negotiate for our participants, but only for those. Right now, we do that for those that already get what sport and rec has to offer, what they value from it. And we spend a lot of our time and energy on those things and then wonder why other students aren't coming. The biggest thing for me is when I started looking at the power of belonging is when I was at the University of Waterloo, we were able to grow our program registrations from 11,000 program participants a year to over 30,000 programs participants per year. There was no change in demographics and population. We didn't build any new facilities. And in hindsight, when I look back, what we did was we really focused on the people. And at the time, I didn't label it as belonging, but through this reflection, I realized what we did was really navigate what the people, how do we serve the person and not worry so much about the structure. So when I think about the hot take right now, we currently look at framework, assessments, and practices that assume that our participants already know what sport and rec is all about. And so we provide services and a structure to meet those needs. So if you look at all these things, registration, scheduling, rules, policies, equipment, like the list goes on and on. These are all just structures about how we service the people, but none of these are people focused or centered in and of itself. But then when we start asking about, well, what does success look like? If we were to ask you conversationally, you'll talk about success as, oh, it's so great when students find their sense of belonging and they come to the rec center and they find friends and they get healthy and they love what we do. Wonderful story. Yet when it comes time to assessment and we write our annual reports, what is it we're actually writing? We talk about revenue generation, head counts, registration number, percentage of hours of facility use, staffing hours. When we assess our staff, we look at certifications, how many hours did they work, their technical skills. That doesn't seem to be very people focused. And so, and then oftentimes we'll throw in stories of personal impact just kind of as a little bit of a topping on top. And so kind of what the argument here is saying that if we're going to focus on belonging, we need to switch that narrative. We need to flip from structure to people. And so what does that look like? So a people first framework is about leading from feelings and compassion, right? It's that really the big thing is, how do our students feel after they participate in our programs, that they're a part of what we do? It's looking at when we program that we're programming of and by the students and not necessarily for, because really most of our attention is programming for. We throw the programming at them and hope that they get involved. Looking at participant wise, and again, in sport and rec, we often look at, well, they want to get healthy, they want to look better. There's a huge impact of social interactions, the concept of fun. Just doing those things for fun. And when we look at a lot of our rules, what really happens is we focus on the activity first. So if you're programming basketball and the focus is often, well, we're looking at programming for basketball players. If we switch that around to a focus of people first, we should be looking at, we are programming for students who are playing basketball. And that is a distinct difference with regards to the way you're going to look at that framework. So I'm going to put that aside for now because we'll talk about that later. But really, when you put that programming first, it really narrows your focus to how you're going to schedule, register, and all that, because you're assuming they're already part of a basketball culture. Another big thing for me is that all of our actions should be about changing behaviors in students. So are they becoming more students more active more often? Are they becoming more, are their behaviors actually changing to meet our outcomes? And again, we'll talk about that later as well. One of the biggest things about belonging for me is, I never have ever felt that we are in competition with any services in collegiate recreation. I don't believe we're in competition with the boutiques, the hot yogas, the you name them. I'm drawing a blank here of the other ones, but and we're not in competition with other services across campus. Our goals and our outcomes are always aligned to students and about their health and things. So if a student has decided to go do CrossFit somewhere, and they're not coming to our facility, well, then we're actually meeting our mission, because that student has found a way to be active and healthy, and they're getting all that. They found a place where they belong. That's great. Let's stop putting resources to that individual, because they found what our outcome is about that healthy student. And lastly, if you look at mission, vision, and values of departments and institutions, it doesn't talk about, we value revenue, we value filling up spaces, right? They're very much people-centric. Yet oftentimes we don't see the behaviors and the actions of our departments and institutions being aligned with those. And that's really what, that people first framework comes through. And the idea that really it's about the intentionality, that we're putting resources, support, and assessment of outcomes linked to belonging. When we talk about EDI and its importance, and that's, you'll see diversity officers now and things like that coming up in institutions, yet diversity, EDI, belonging, it's everyone's job at the university. And it's interesting, you know, if you were to look at any of your budgets, how many have a line item that is dedicated to EDI or belonging? It's not there, right? These are the things like, well, we hope it happens. And we're saying to be a people first framework, to focus on belonging, this has to be intentional, and we need to start putting resources towards this if we want to see sustainable change. So I'm going to pass it over to Larry, who's going to talk about a wonderful initiative called Act, Belong, Commit at Elon University. And take it away, Larry.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Some really great framing in there. And hopefully as you hear me talk a little bit about a broad overview of this framework that we've recently implemented at Elon, you're going to hear aspects of what Mark was talking about over the last 20 minutes. So back in 2017-18, I had the opportunity to co-chair a university task force on wellness and well-being on our campus. And this was made up of 15 students, faculty, and staff from around the university. A lot of different departments represented, students in student government represented, students that really didn't have specific affiliations were also represented. So we came together in September of that year and really got started by identifying what are the 3 primary goals as we begin our work together. And we went around, right? Because our charge was talking about aligning goals and resources, creating a shared language and framework and model and all of those kind of things. But we wanted this to be deeper. So when we developed those goals that we were going to use as a working group, we came up with these 3 things. 1, we wanted whatever we came out with to connect in every aspect of the university. We used this idea that from a student's first interaction with the university, through the admissions process, on a website, whatever it is, all the way through pre-matriculation, coming onto campus for new student orientation, and then we use this, this phrase, throughout and beyond their time at Elon, thinking that everything had to connect in that. Right? It kept us focused on our goal that we weren't preparing students to get to a graduation stage. We were preparing them for what happened after they walked across a graduation stage. Our second goal is we really wanted to elevate the importance of mental health. Right? We've talked a lot, you know, about a mental health crisis across the country, across the world, and the impact that has had on young people, specifically as they're making that transition into adulthood, into college. So we wanted to make sure that was an elevated piece of it. And then the last goal was whatever we came out with, we wanted a model that was focused on behavior. And as it turned out, that was the most difficult thing that we had to accomplish. As we started our work and looking at the myriad of different models that are out there, you know, we found pretty quickly that a lot of models talked a lot about defining what wellness is, categorizing it, right? Different themes or dimensions or those kind of things. And a lot of them fell short of talking about how it happened. So we were really struggling out of the gates trying to figure out how we were going to develop a model and a concept that was going to meet that goal. And then as it happened, a colleague of ours was teaching abroad for a semester in Denmark and introduced us to this Act, Belong, Commit framework that they were just beginning to roll out as a national public health campaign. So as we started to look at it, it was a decade old at the time. It was evidence-based, grounded in public health and psychology. But interestingly, it was developed in Western Australia, and the developer of it, his background was in marketing. So it really got to this idea of how you package all of these things together. So the basics of it, it's this 3-pronged approach: act, belong, and commit. Act is do something. Every day we should be doing things physically, socially, spiritually that contribute to our well-being. As we do those, we go a little bit deeper, and that's where belong comes into, and that's do something with someone. That really emphasizes the importance of authentic relationships, feeling like you're part of a community through groups, clubs, organizations, classes, in your residence hall, whatever. And then finally, as you continue to go deeper and you feel that you're a part of this community, you start to develop this reciprocal concept of how you contribute, right? So that being that it's my responsibility to take care of everyone else in my community as much as it is for my community to take care of me. And that's where commit comes in. And that's do something that matters or do something meaningful. So through your relationships, you develop that sense of that shared responsibility. You take up causes, you volunteer, you search for a vocation or an avocation that brings you meaning and purpose. So that's the framework in a nutshell. The outcomes, I love this phrase that they use, that we create mentally healthy people, right? So often we've looked at mental health as a reaction to something that's wrong, right? And this framework kind of flips it on its head, that no matter where you are on the spectrum of well-being, the spectrum of mental health, you have an opportunity to take agency over improving that. And that's really been, as we've gone into early implementation, one of the key pieces for us that, you know, again, going back to that goal of connecting in every pocket of the university. Finally, what this does is, since we're focused on the behavior and you and as the individual, we are less concerned about where the model, you know, the 6-dimension or 8-dimension model falls into place. We still do have one of those on our campus, but we use it primarily for categorizing resources, so that you don't have just this one big laundry list of things that exist. So to give you an example of how this might look in somebody's life, if you enjoy working out, maybe you become a regular in group exercise classes, and through that, you know, you start to get your people, right? You're taking that same 10 o'clock class every Tuesday, and you start to get to know those folks. Maybe through that, you have deeper conversations, get to know the instructor more, then you're inspired to be a group exercise instructor because you want to help other people on their health and well-being journey, right? So there you had the workout was the act, the regular and group exercise is where you found the belong, and then the commit turned out to you wanting to give something back. Could work the same thing, right? If you enjoy playing basketball, you join an intramural basketball team, and then maybe you find out that the university has unified sports, so you want to get involved in that. The great thing about this framework is that, you know, these are easy examples in our world. But as we were starting to market this out to the rest of the university, I could also walk into the library and talk to our dean of the library and said, let's talk about a person that just loves to read, right? We can talk about having book clubs that are available. So you bring people together over this common topic. And through that, maybe they read Martin Luther King Jr.'s Why We Can't Wait, and they're inspired to activism. So then they seek out other resources and opportunities and those kind of things available to them on campus or in the community outside of campus. So this all goes back to Marc's point about belonging being a feeling, right? It's about me. It's not about you telling me what I need to do or putting me in this box. It's about me being able to chart my own path and see how that development and where I choose to dip my toe in is going to help me in one way, but where I choose to really dive into is going to really help bring me into this, again, shared responsibility and sense of community. So bringing this back to belonging, because I could go on and we could do an entire webinar on Act, Belong, Commit, but that's not exactly why we're here today. The evidence, belonging is the tipping point, and that's why we wanted to talk to people about that today, because, you know, folks can dabble. And so often, again, going back to Marc's point about how we define success, about numbers and metrics, well, sometimes we get a lot of people that just dabble. But this really allows us as departments to focus on that piece of how do we get folks to dive in just a little bit more, or the other side of it. If they're diving in a little bit more somewhere else, how do we let go of that? How do we let go and know that our mission is being fulfilled elsewhere on a university campus? And that's really where we brought that when we made our recommendations as a task force. And that came out in 2018. And then after a year of grassroots push by a few key players and departments around the university, it was finally adopted by the president as a university-wide framework in 2019. And you know, we're starting to move some pretty significant resources towards it in our next university strategic plan. We have a little hiccup going on right now, like many of you do, but you know, it's even more important now to be thinking about these things. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But Marc, that's the framework in a nutshell.
That's amazing. You know, I had a chance. Larry shared some of the resources, and you know, this is a well thought out initiative, not only at Elon but globally. And so, you know, I encourage people to check that out. But you know, Larry, you talked about this being a university-wide initiative. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of look at it two ways. One is, what did your department how did you have to change your previous thinking to make this framework a priority is one. And then, you talked about getting the institution on board. Getting the president's support is pretty big. But I'm sure, when you needed to change your framework and your thinking, it probably had an impact on your staff. What was that impact? And, so how did you translate this? Okay, this is what we're doing, specifically when it's not a canned program where it says, okay, do this and you'll achieve this. It's really a reflective process.
Yeah. I think that was one of the biggest pieces of this, Mark, is that it's one of those frameworks that everyone can tap into, which is the biggest benefit of it, but it also turns out to be the biggest challenge, because wellness in general is a pretty ubiquitous term. But then once you start to kind of decentralize it as we have and say, all right, here's a general framework, tell us how you plug in, it can get a little unwieldy. So, stepping back to the first part of that question, and by the way, I'm going to pause and say, if anyone would like to learn more about ABC, I am happy to share any resources that we have at Elon, or with our friends in Western Australia. So feel free to reach out to me after this. But, going back to that first part of your question, the biggest thing we had to do out of the gates was get rid of this concept that anyone owns wellness, right? That there are lines in the sand, that this is what you take care of, this is what I take care of. And we really had to take that universal approach that if we can all tap in, that means we all can't have every piece of the pie either. So we had to lose a little bit of our autonomy. But what that did, after we started getting into that mindset, it started us thinking about partnerships in different ways. Within the first year of this, we had talked with one academic department about a split position that now has come to be. We looked at one of our underutilized spaces and worked with a different academic department to flip that into a space that's utilized for classes during the day. We do some programming in it at night, and the chair of that academic department trained all of our group exercise instructors. We flipped it to a Pilates studio. We looked and brought people around the table rather than doing our own specific surveys. We're modifying the Act, Belong, Commit survey that focuses very heavily on belonging, and we're developing a university-wide instrument that does focus on those outcomes that we talked about. But again, we had to let go of some of those things that we typically do, less satisfaction surveys and things like that, and really, replacing a lot of those questions with ones that are going to be pulled into this university pot, so we can look in general about how students are able to succeed and ultimately thrive. And then looking at, as an institution, institutionally and my staff, I'm not sure that we're still 100% on board, right? That's an ongoing thing that we're always trying to do, because we have that, I love my team, that we have so many professionals that are just high-level experts in their area, right? So they come in and they have these set of goals and they want to make an impact, and letting go can be hard, right? So we're constantly navigating that give and take about, where we look at programmatic identity versus our responsibility to be part of this university initiative. But thinking about it at the institutional level, we were just pervasive. To be honest with you, I was kind of a gnat on people's shoulder for a year and a half, because we believed in it, right? There was this critical mass of us that absolutely believed in this. In the places that we had to talk about where the evidence was, we were making sure we were putting the research out in front of them. In the place that we had to sell them where they belonged in this conversation, where they might have thought, maybe this isn't me, that goes back to the example that we used when we talked to the library. For other places, a lot of it was, wow, you have a million good ideas, but let's slow down and walk through this together. So, we had to know where our audience was and where they were, but eventually, once the president got on board, and she's a tremendous advocate for wellness and well-being. In our new university strategic plan, it's one of the 4 primary themes that's going to guide our institution for the next 10 years. So once that was put front and center, and we had that university level buy-in, I think the folks who maybe weren't on the bus at that point are starting to get on. So I can't lie and say that the president coming out, having it highlighted at that high level wasn't the real turning point, where it went from that grassroots level to now we're starting to be able to more systematically operationalize it.
Mm-hmm.
With the
So,
staff,
oh,
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
no, staff. I want to hear the staff. Yeah.
Yeah. We were in the middle of a department reorganization when all of this was coming on. So we were, as one of the recommendations that came out of the task force, moving to this integrated wellness model too. So health promotion, peer educators, athletic training, we're all coming under our department, and campus recreation transition to campus recreation and wellness. So it was timely, but again, we had to look at that autonomy piece. So the question was, and I think where we started getting folks on board immediately was, we came around the table and talked about how we're going to operate as a department, how we're going to tap into this. And the first activity we did was, what are we already doing that contributes? How can we just remessage it, repackage it, maybe look at a partnership that we didn't look at before? And once folks realized that we were already moving in this direction, we just had to have a few tweaks. That was a key piece. After that, it went back to, how do we define success, starting to move away from those big numbers as our primary metrics for success and thinking more about belonging. And as we've gone through a couple iterations of the assessment instrument, we're starting to get some early data back from that. And it's moving in a positive direction, which I think allows folks that it empowers them really to move away from that security blanket. That's a big fat number, and think about some different ways that we can define success. And like you were saying, our resources and how we allocate those have shifted a little bit. You know, one program I want to particularly highlight is we have a group exercise program. We have decreased the number of group exercise classes that we have a week. Again, in an effort to get more people in less classes to promote that sense of community. And some of the resources that we saved from that, we implemented this new program that is a partnership with our counseling services, that it's 8 people in it max. It's an intensive program, 5 weeks long. You spend 45 minutes with a personal trainer or group exercise instructor, going through learning various aspects of a fitness center, working out, etc. And then you spend the next 45 minutes with a counselor, really looking at behavior modification and how you're going to increase your adherence to an exercise program. And it's only 8 people. We do it 3 to 5 times a year. So we've moved some of these resources that were, about getting people through the door, and we've transitioned them to something that's really going to impact only 30 to 40 people a year. So that's just one of the examples of how we've shifted programmatically to account for the framework.
So it's interesting you mentioned about assessment, and you talked about satisfaction surveys, which was interesting. If you were to think about the questions on a satisfaction survey, it's nothing to do with belonging. It's like, did you like the equipment? Did you like the time? How was the cost? Were you satisfied? Being satisfied is a much different feeling than feeling like I belong. And I would probably say that program with only the 8 students in it, when you start assessing that program, they would talk about how has this changed your behavior, So it's interesting that you have similar programs, with what you would say are the same outcomes, but traditionally we assess them completely different. And so have you changed any of that assessment with other programs, so it's no longer a satisfaction survey? And then, how do you, it's all well and good to say, yeah, we're going to measure belonging. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, again, we're utilizing an evidence-based framework, so the research is there. The challenge with the ABC assessment, it's based on the Warwick-Edinburgh study. The challenge with it is that the framework was developed to be at a community level. So we have a much more focused setting here in a university. So we have done iterations of it, and we're working with faculty researchers on how to tweak that survey to make it more applicable for us. So we're using something that was evidence-based. We introduce it into our community. As the results start to come in from that, we're not only assessing the outcomes from the student perspective, but we're also assessing the effectiveness of the instrument itself and beginning to tweak it for our specific population. And we're in year 2 of that. And I think we probably have another year or 2 before we get it right. But I think the key is that, we're starting to ask questions in a different way. And once we get that instrument to a place that, it is able to be validated, then it'll be set and we'll be able to utilize it that way. I think another way that we're doing that, again, internally within the department, is that we took a much more specific approach to our mission. So we completely rewrote the mission statement. And before it was, we provide fitness, recreation experiences to impact the development of students and contribute to well-being. We defined how ABC works in our department in our new mission statement. We contribute to the holistic well-being of students, faculty, and staff by providing access to recreational and educational experiences, right? That's the ACT. Fostering a sense of community and belonging, there's the belong, and empowering individuals to cultivate positive wellness, values, and behavior that last throughout and beyond their time at Elon. That's the commit. And so again, once you specifically define what that means to you, some of those assessment questions are going to pull themselves out of that. So using a framework that already exists, plus drilling it down to what it looks like in our day-to-day, that's how we've started to develop some of those instruments.
So practically, last question for me is, how did you implement this for things like staff training and program changes? Like you mentioned, you lowered the amount of group fitness classes to help, one is to create that bigger sense of belonging, as well as, to drive resources to programs that traditionally maybe wouldn't show up because they don't fit our revenue line items. So what are some other program changes that you can kind of just touch on and say, yeah, this is, you can really see the difference here and the impact it's having? And then also, how did you train your staff differently?
Yeah. Again, going back to it, it's been more of a change in our approach rather than the programming itself, right? It's taking what we hoped was a byproduct and elevating that as the primary outcome. So going back to equity and inclusion, we started by, again, if folks can't get to ACT, we can't get them to belong. So that first piece was the identification of barriers that exist. All right. And those barriers could be financial. They could be from some of the things that you talked about how the facility's laid out, cleanliness, access, policies, whatever. And we started to remove those barriers and shift resources to make sure we were able to remove those barriers. One of the things that we did, you asked how EDI can show up in a budget. One of the few things that we have to charge for here at Elon, group exercise passes, club sports dues, and our big one is our outdoor adventure trips. Well, we create scholarships for those programs, right? That any student can come on, I'd really like to do this. I don't have the financial resources. At the bottom of each of those sites, it's just an open-ended questionnaire. You fill it out with your registration form, and we have this money set aside that we give out on an ad hoc basis, right? It's not this exhaustive registration or application process. We just have that money set aside that we're able to use to offset some of the costs that would have normally been defrayed. And as we're doing that, those are the kind of things that are getting folks into the program that wouldn't have been otherwise. Some programs we've reduced. I talked about group exercise. We've reduced our breadth to focus more on depth. We've decreased the amount of intramural offerings we have, decreased our weekly group exercise classes. We've almost eliminated single day special events because we were shown that we had always thought that special events were the gateway into the rest of the department, but the data wasn't showing it. People that came in and participated in a single day event weren't necessarily then matriculating into similar programs throughout the department. So again, we started to move those out and then have those resources really looking at what student organizations can we partner with, what other departments around campus can we partner with, and shifting those resources to, again, allowing ourselves to be partners, whether it's from facility, program development, or sometimes even just assessment of those programs that are developed by students, right? We also have, again, a fund that's set aside in our student activities account every year, where any student in our department can come up with a new idea or initiative that it's basically just kind of pilot money, right? That we're going to try something new. But again, it's initiated by students. Our primary rec facility goal now is not just a head count, but it's ensuring that 85% of our open hours in each space in our facility are preserved for open recreation. Again, looking at people coming into the building, interacting with each other in a non-program, non-structured way being one of our primary goals.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that, Larry. There are some questions about whether you can share a bit of the surveys that you're using in that. So I kind of put that in the chat. And please interject as we continue going down. So, this is a great, a whole institutional initiative going on that you can really look at the framework and understand, oh, well, this is what it can look like when a whole institution moves. Let's face it, not all of us are in that position where we're, maybe even looking at our own just area within our department, let alone our full department. But we wanted to kind of get into, the practicality of what does it mean looking through a lens of belonging. And I really love what Larry said about, not so much change regarding the programming. It really is just, we started looking at it in a different way and prioritizing things differently because our outcomes were now different. It was no longer about head count. It was about, assessing that sense of belonging amongst the student population. And it didn't matter if they were doing it in the rec center or at the library or within a club or, and so what does that mean when we look at our programs and what we can do when we're looking through a lens of belonging? And a lot of that comes from, taking a look at your vision and mission and value statements of your department. Oftentimes these are very well articulated, but how often do we actually go back to them to utilize them? And if that mission vision is no longer reflective of what you think you're doing, maybe it's time to revisit that. The other thing is, for belonging, it's as simple as looking at the people. And again, I love that idea of it saying, stop looking at the structure, let's look at the people. So when we think about the invitation, what does a better invitation look like? And again, it's just more than our marketing. When we think about things like the images in our facility, the publications that go out, oftentimes we're putting a lot of information out. And again, information is important for those that are already understanding the value of recreation and want to be a part of it. When is it? How do I get involved? How do I register? Great. But that's a small portion of our population where there is a huge portion that are looking at, I'm not sure I belong in your facility. I'm not a sport person. I'm not fit. I need to work out before I even get into your facility to work out. That's that attitude that we're looking at when we're trying to look at the broader community. And so, and in essence, how much of our resources in the invitation are talking about changing behavior rather than informing individuals about what we have. And so, I think of program descriptions and offering. I've been in recreation I still don't know what TRX 90 or I don't know what those are. I don't like the gym. I don't go in the gymnasium. That's not how I like to move my body. I totally value it as a way that many do. But when we look at that and we look at like our equipment and our high-end spin bikes and treadmills and that really services a small portion of the population who already know about that. Collegiate recreation is amazing because sometimes it is the first foray into a fitness class, into a conditioning play, into an organized intramural ever. And so how are we using our program descriptions and offerings to focus on that aspect that they don't know what this is about? And so how can we have that invitation focus more on the feeling that they get? When we talk about, you talked about, how do we engage others? And it's going to places they already belong. So, and that's where it comes into, you use the word partnership, Larry, and I'm going to challenge you. Probably those are more collaborations because you're having that shared outcome. And it doesn't matter if they come to the rec center, right? You have that shared outcome and you're collaborating together to see what can we do to help that shared outcome. And so, I was at Mount Royal University where the strategic plan for the institution was about indigenization. And so we made that a priority and we worked with the INISCM Indigenous Student Center. And, one of the things about that invitation and understanding other populations that may not be as ingrained in the sport and rec culture is that we need to go to where they already feel like they belong. And there's something called partner power meetings. And this kind of changes that idea of collaboration versus partnership. When oftentimes, and I know I've been faulty of this, is you go to you go to a resource center, you'll go to student orientation going, hey, we'd like to do this, right? And that's a partnership. Fine, you run that program, we'll try to send some students there, see what happens. As opposed to working together and asking that department, what is it you value? What is it the students that you service value? What are your challenges? How can what are shared outcomes that we're going to look to grow? And a lot of that takes vulnerability and that ability to let go, because they may not, in the end, utilize your programs and services. They might use your facilities, they might use some of your equipment, because they're better suited at facilitating that sense of belonging than the rec center might. But when you're collaborating rather than a partnership, you may not see that direct outcome in a headcount. But you'll see that direct outcome that, oh, the equipment I lent them helped develop a sense of belonging within this student that helps the institution and student wellness as a whole. The other thing about invitation I find so interesting is this word of mouth. If you ask anybody, oh, I look like I'm frozen. Larry, can you hear me?
Mark, I can hear you, but I can't see you anymore.
All right, well, I'll keep talking. I'm not that pretty anyways. Is the word of mouth. When you talk when I talk to anybody in student affairs and in recreation, we talk about the power of word of mouth. And so the invitation that I use in belonging is oftentimes participants find a sense of belonging within the recreation center, but a majority do not. What they do is find sense of belonging with that student that has a sense of belonging with the recreation center. So I kind of call that student as a secondary influencer, is that the participant they're bringing with them has no clue about registration process or whatever. They've just been invited to come and do the activity. And that sense of belonging is owned by the participant and not the rec center. And we talk about how powerful that is about, and we use it in customer service all the time, but I also question that we don't do enough intentionality to foster that sense, like bring a friend programs or finding these ambassadors across campus that are those influencers that create that sense of belonging that we cannot, because we don't have connections with those participants yet. And that's kind of like that act. First they're going to act, and those students are going to bring in other students. And as they're acting, now those other students might feel that connection. They may not, and that's okay too. But that power of word of mouth, we know how powerful it is, but we do rarely intentionally put resources to say, how are we going to maximize this word of mouth? We talk about giveaways and things like that. We used to give away socks at one of our institutions, and the feedback was, oh, the students love the socks. That's it. We're going to go out on the main street. We're going to hand these socks out, and oh, look at how many. We gave out 500 pairs of socks. But again, it comes back to what Larry was saying, is did it change behaviors? And we were probably giving out, oh, cool pair of socks, right? Oh, well, they're branded. Well, I'd argue they're on your feet. You don't see them. But it's this idea that says, but we're not measuring whether they were satisfied or happy that they got a pair of socks. We were hoping that they would come to our rec center, and we didn't even measure that or assess that. Did it change their behavior? Did they feel more connected with our department because of that? All we knew is we gave out 500 pairs of socks and people loved them. So when you think about welcoming, you think about things like, the language and image and signage. Does your center and your publications have, super fit individuals? Is it all, homogenous group of individuals, or are they young people fit, potentially white, in a certain look that you're hoping to do, rather than are they a reflection of the population that you're serving? I remember a long time ago, I met with the LGBTQI resource center, and it's run by students, where we were talking about, again, these partner power meetings where we could, talk about what their values are, what their sense of belonging was, and how we can help facilitate that. And out of that, one of the feedback was, well, the images in your publication and website don't look like me. And I was like, whoa, oh, that's strange. What does that mean? And then this was just on an individual level. She said, and she started going through it and realizing, oh my gosh, we had this publication for 5-6 years before I even realized this is a really homogenistic view of our participants. And it wasn't like we needed a new photo shoot. All we needed to do was just get photos of our participants, and it would reflect who should be there. When you think about staff training, this comes back to how are they involved in creating a welcoming environment? you know, one of the issues is we worry so much about certifications and their technical skills. Rarely do we assess them on how they help create a sense of belonging and community among participants. Fitness instructors are great. Whenever we hear of a great fitness instructor, it's not because of their technical skills. It's because of how they make the participants feel in that class and how they belong. Sometimes it's, oh, they just really work me out hard. But most of the time it's, no, I just feel great in this class regardless what we're doing because I feel like I belong. And again, we don't do enough intentional training because it's not a skill set that necessarily everyone has. And how do we intentionally do that? You know, creating culture among participants is huge because there's going to be aspects of belonging that we cannot control. So what do participants feel like when they go play pickup basketball? You know, there's so many, and Larry and I discussed this on a call earlier, was, you know, how many students come into our facility and have a bad experience and never come back. And we never know because we never had a touch point. Sometimes that's right at the customer service desk because it's about policies and procedures that we were about. Someone forgot an ID card and we said, well, that's the rules. And now that person who was maybe courageous to try coming for the first time has just been negated, didn't feel welcomed, and decided, well, screw this, I'm out of here. And we never hear about that again. Or with regards to where they're in playing pickup basketball and the group playing have been bullies or they're monopolizing the court and they go, well, I came in here, I don't even get to play. They're not going to the customer service desk saying, those guys wouldn't let me shoot my ball. They're just going to leave and they're not going to come back.
You know, Mark, I think that is an important topic right now as all of us are starting to think about what reopening might look like. And, you know, we're reopening our facilities on June 1. And we have had signage installed on the walls on the floor that says stay 6 feet apart. Our front desk has a big plexiglass screen that's going to separate our welcome desk from the participants as they come in. And we're going to be wearing gloves and masks and all of those kind of things. And, you know, so policy driven right now because we're anxious, right? All of us around the world that are in this business are anxious about, oh my gosh, if we screw this up, we're going to get shut down for a long time. So we hold on to those policies, right? We hold on to those pieces of making sure everyone's doing exactly the right thing at the right time. But I think it's important for us to also be thinking about how we integrate humanity into that policy enforcement, how we still are able to train our staffs on their responsibility in being ambassadors of the program, welcoming to all of the folks that are coming in, helping to educate them because, you know, you're talking about the person that if this is the time that you're trying to come into the rec center for the first time, right? You've been cooped up in your house for 2 or 3 months and you know what, I'm going to start, this is kind of like a New Year's resolution. I'm going to get healthy as we're coming out of this quarantine time. And that's the first experience they have with the rec center. So I think now is more important than ever that we're really thinking about how we take a humane and service-oriented approach to bringing folks into the facility. You know, one of the things that we're doing is having this shared responsibility campaign about how we're keeping the facility clean. What we're doing, and there's just a list of some of the activities that we're doing and precautions that we're taking, and then what you can do so that we can all keep our facility open and welcoming, clean and safe together. So I encourage everyone to be thinking about those kind of things.
That's awesome. I apologize. I know it is 9:59. We're going to try to go through this quickly. I don't know if we're going to get shut off at 10, but if people do need to go, you can always contact us and these slides will be available in the webinar recorded. So the last things is how do we make people feel included? And that's really comes back to the participant why. Why are they there? If, you know, I heard on an intramural roundtable, like, oh, you know, esports is great for our intramural participants because they all love competition. Well, I grew intramurals from 7,000 to over 20,000 participants. And the majority of those were because we focused less on competition and more on the social and the fun aspects of the sport. And, you know, we did a survey asking them, not a satisfaction, but why. And they said, I do it because it's fun and I get to do it with my friends. So we need to understand that when we put rules and regulations and schedules and all that on the assumptions that we have, like in intramurals about competition, well, then, you know, then we're dead in the water. So understanding that it's more than just fitness, it's more than just health, it's more than just competition. the more opportunities you provide, the more invitations you're sending out. So if you have your traditional sports, those that haven't grown up in those sports aren't going to feel wanting to belong. When I see things like Quidditch come out and see who gets involved in that, it's amazing because you have a new group where they're finding a new sense of belonging in that sport and rec culture. It's focusing on social connectivity. Why are they there? Are you intentionally allowing opportunities for them to connect with their fellow students and participants? And that goes beyond the program. It's about, maybe you have chats, maybe you have things like Words with Friends competitions. Is it about opportunities for them to get together before and after, even about the space that you have within your facility? Staffing diversity. The more diverse your staff is, the more that people are going to feel welcome and invited and essentially included because they see themselves in that. And that's not only race, sexuality, gender, that's body types and accessibilities and people from different faculties and, that whole wide range of representation from your community. And lastly is this of and by the participants. Drop-in works so well because the participants get to own a lot of that. They get to, go and be flexible and participate if they want. One quick thing I have is I tried to start a cricket intramural and it did not go well. If I would have quit and said, well, I guess people just don't want cricket, it wouldn't have happened. When I sat down with the people that were interested in cricket and we started talking about it was our structure that was the problem. It wasn't flexible. It was the way we were trying to fit it into our own intramurals. We decided they wanted to become a club, and our clubs were all social. There was no competition aspect of it. And basically all I had to do was give them time, some space, some funding for equipment. And they ended up getting 550 participants in their first year to be members of their club, where they're running their own little mini tournaments and little intramurals and instructional programs, all for free. And that's because we basically got out of their way and just supported what they needed from that opportunity. And then lastly, I want to talk a bit about the challenges. People talk about, well, there's budget cuts and we lack resources and we don't have support and there's departmental and institutional silos and we're not sure about those outcomes. Well, at least the unclear outcomes, that's solvable. You can get together with your teams and understand what is it we actually truly care about and what we're going to measure. And if you have your departmental silos, we'll start working together about what those shared outcomes are. It's interesting how, we talk about an aquatics participant and an intramural participant and a fitness center participant. And we kind of work in our own little silo to facilitate their experience when that could be the same person utilizing all those services. Yet we often, meet and work separately to facilitate the experience because of the facility that they're in rather than as a collective whole. And the last part about resources is this idea that that's all we have. We have resources. They might be cutting your resources, but then again, it comes back to, well, how do we prioritize what we're currently spending? And so maybe it means you don't buy the $20,000 treadmills and you go with the least expensive because which of your participants are going to care? Now, again, every institution is going to be different and we're not going to sit here and judge, but it's about using that lens to kind of reflect and say, where are we putting our resources and what outcomes are coming from that? Are these aligning to a sense of belonging or not? And if they're not, then maybe it's stop doing those things. Or, and a key example I always get on my high horse is this idea of championship t-shirts for intramurals. I don't get it because it doesn't change behavior. It's often a lot of money for some big schools. We were spending up to $20,000 on t-shirts and it didn't change behaviors. And I'm not sure it created any sense of belonging because first of all, I didn't really see them wear them around campus. And it's not like people going, oh, I want to be a part of that. No, because they're going, well, you guys must be an elite team to be that champion. And so again, it's maybe we don't do that because it's not, and then we'll get, well, yeah, but they love the t-shirts, but it's not changing behavior and it's not anyway changing our outcome of belonging because those are high-end players that are going to play regardless of the t-shirt or not.
Mark, we had a great question came in that asked about ABC with budget cuts and reductions, and I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. Whether you use Act, Belong, Commit or any other framework or just center it in your department mission, now is a time that you have to know what's important to your department, right? And I think it's more important than ever that we have a strong sense of mission and values and we make decisions based on what those are. We're at a time that we have to, you're right, good or bad, working or not, those are easy decisions. And to be honest with you, we should be eliminating things that don't work even when we have great budget times. The real challenge right now is we're having to distinguish between what is good, what is exceptional, and what is essential. And you're going to fall somewhere in those three categories. And you know, you have to know who you are as an organization and how you're defining success to be able to distinguish between those three, because there's often very slim lines between them.
Mm-hmm. That's and I think, you know, budget and resources are kind of Larry's and my forte. We really love playing with numbers and understanding that, but again, they are just numbers on a page. It really comes to how, and there's many things we can do that don't cost money, right? Like a change in framework. It's looking our full-time staff and our part-time staff, how are they creating this sense of belonging that doesn't really cost money. It just changes, it needs a change in attitude and a change in approach. And, you know, Larry had mentioned something to me about that compassion aspect, right? Is that when compassion takes over the policy, that's when you see some behavioral changes. And if we can really take a look at the people first and understand. So you had mentioned, you know, students that maybe can't afford recreation. You know, one thing that we used to do was if they can't, you know, we go to a food bank, the student food bank, and we'd say, because if students can't afford food, they probably can't afford recreation. So we would go and have conversations with the coordinators there and say, here's some either free passes or a free registration that they can come and talk to me directly. We'll get them into that program. We're not worried about their registration cost, because we really looked at what our outcomes are. It wasn't about revenue generation. You know, and we often changed our policies because we started understanding the barriers and constraints they were having. You know, a key example that I see, and I can't believe we still argue sometimes, is a dress code. You know, well, you got to have shorts and a t-shirt if you're going to shoot a basketball around. And I don't see why. And I used to be one of those individuals. But if we see someone in jeans and a golf shirt playing intramural basketball, and they got shoes that are non-marking, so they're not going to hurt anything, it's like, well, why not? Right? And you know, pitcher going down there and telling them, yeah, you got to change, you're not okay. They're done. They're not coming back. They don't feel like they belong. And so we really, you know, there is no real true answer to, because everyone has different challenges and populations and demographics within their institution. But like Larry said, the framework works wherever. It really comes down to people first, and thinking about your outcome is how or what we are doing, creating a sense of belonging amongst our students. And it's not going to change a lot of our programs, because like I said, we already do that in collegiate recreation. We create a sense of belonging for so many. But again, right now it's a single type party where everyone's invited and we're playing the same music over and over again, and wondering why we're not getting new participants in. It's because, well, you got to have some flavor. You got to have some changes and flexibility. And so, you know, when you start looking at this, you don't necessarily have to change your mission vision. You don't have to, it's about looking at your policies and saying, okay, here's this policy. How does this create a sense of belonging? Why is it there? How is it people-centric? And then you start looking at that. And so, you know, something like the forgotten ID card, well, they're going to take it. Okay, that's all the reasons why structurally, well, they might take advantage, they may not be members. But now let's look at it, the people-centered. And now what questions are you asking? I mentioned that at the beginning about the basketball player versus a person playing basketball. A basketball player is expecting high-end referees that know the rules, that, you know, I get 6 games, I get playoffs, a three-pointer is this, and well, what's the throwing out of bounds rule? Can I throw it off? They get that. But so many in collegiate recreation are just people who've been invited to play basketball. Hey, you want to play in my intramural basketball? Yeah, sure. Why not? That's awesome. Okay, I'll go play. And so now what does that look like? How do you referee the game differently? We used to have beginner basketball where games were like the final was 10-6. Right? And if we called every double dribble, well, there would be no game. And so the referees were trained differently to facilitate that experience, because in the end, we didn't care who won. We were creating an experience where those players playing basketball could have a fun time engaging each other in a safe way. And so it really is about taking all of these things and just looking at it through a different pair of glasses, that instead of the structure, revenue generation, head count, it's saying, how can I change the structure to people? How can I change this lens to people and belonging? You got any final thoughts there, Larry? Or if there are any questions from anyone that we can address? I know we are over time, but thank you for sticking with us. And Aaron has mentioned that we can take a few extra minutes if there's no shut off time.
No, just thank you all for being here, taking time out. I know there's a lot of things on people's minds right now, so appreciate you all joining us for this conversation.
Yes, I agree, and I think Larry brought a good point about the aspect of reopening, and that is, you know, we've heard this. What is the new normal? And the new normal is, well, I think it's people. In the end, if we stop worrying about our structure so much and think, how can we restructure ourselves so that there's more focus on people? So with reopening, I get people have different challenges, and pressures from higher ups and from community and from students. But I am concerned that if we continue moving and trying our past structures during this pandemic, then we have concerns that we're not going to be sustainable. We're going to actually create more isolation as we start really focusing on our current participants who are going to dwindle just due to the nature that they may not come back right away. And then we're going to lose sight of, well, how do we create that sense of community? And really, when you look at community, and you can, collegiate recreation is amazing because you know who your community is. It's your students of your school. They've come to your school. They've chosen your school. They want to be a part of that experience. We have a great opportunity there. It's not the same thing as a for business fitness center that is trying to plead and pull these people in. So you have your community there. Now it's thinking about them as a holistic approach rather than just those that like sport and rec and we want them there. So if there are no more questions, I don't see that there are. I want to thank you all very much for your time. I know this is a tough time for everyone, but I'm also feeling very optimistic. I think that this is the time where we are questioning and thinking about our purpose and why we exist. We've talked a lot about in the past, especially through NIRSA, about proving collegiate recreation as an important experience and aspect of the university experience. And that's being shown more now than ever. And so if we can think about that and think about our purpose of healthy, active students that are mentally well, that are socially well, and really what Larry said is, and it's beyond, it's not about what happens only at university, but when they leave and what type of person are they going out into the world. Now's the time that people are listening, people are interested in doing something new, because things are going to be cut. It's going to be challenging, but if we focus on people, focus on belonging, I'm really confident that we're going to see some. It's someone I mentioned the pandemic's like a forest fire, right? We can't appreciate it right now. It's burning everything. The forest is aflame. We're in the middle watching everything we love just be torn down. But now this is when new growth can happen afterwards. When it's all said and done, we start seeing new flowers and new plant life and a new ecosystem. And so how can we be a part of that new ecosystem? So thank you very much to NIRSA. Thank you very much for you all. And as Larry mentioned earlier, you can feel free to reach out to either of us. We're pretty accessible. Maybe we can put our emails into the chat, and so that it's there once it's recorded, people can look up, but I'm pretty sure we're easy to find. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of week and stay healthy.